Tonight, you'll travel back nearly 2,000 years to walk beside a man who ruled the greatest empire on earth, yet spent his nights quietly reminding himself to stay humble, patient, and kind. His name was Marcus Aurelius, and unlike any emperor before or after him, he didn't seek glory. He sought inner peace. What does it mean to lead millions while battling your own mind? What can a dying emperor teach you about living well today? Stay with me, because this isn't a lecture. It's a slow unraveling of war, of wisdom, of worry, of what remains when power fades. By the end of this journey, you just might see yourself reflected in a philosopher king. Tonight we begin a long, quiet journey, not through foggy legends or ancient myths, but across the real life of a man who ruled the greatest empire the world had ever seen, and did so with ink-stained fingers and a furrowed brow. Tonight, we walk alongside Marcus Aurelius. You stand on a marble floor that hums faintly with history. The walls are high, smooth, and cool to the touch. Outside, Rome simmers in the sun, but here in the home of the Annius family, the air is shaded and soft. You are just a child, born in 121 CE, into privilege so polished it practically glows. Your family is aristocratic, wealthy, and embedded in Roman tradition like roots in stone. But you aren't like the other children who run laughing through the courtyards, chasing after figs and glory. You walk a little slower. You listen more than you speak. While others spar with wooden swords, you hold papyrus scrolls as if they were treasures. And they are. Words will become your armor and your burden. Your father dies when you are still small. The grief is quiet but long-lasting, like a bruise beneath the skin. Your mother, Domitia Lucilla, raises you with a grace sharpened by duty. She teaches you dignity without boasting, calm without cowardice, and how to carry pain with elegance. These will be lessons you revisit often. People begin to notice something different about you. Not your face, though you are handsome in that Roman way, with sharp eyes and a brow that always seems to be contemplating something invisible. No, it's the way you move through the world. Watchful, thoughtful, like you're listening for things most others don't hear. Whispers beneath history's noise. You're called Verissimus by the Emperor Hadrian himself, a nickname meaning the truest one. It's flattering, sure, but it's also a test. Hadrian was not a man to throw around compliments unless they had an edge. The emperor watches you. He sees not a soldier, not a brute, not a schemer, but something rarer, a thinker. And in a world of fire and iron, thinkers are often feared, or worse, used. At just 12 years old, you are inducted into the priesthood of Mars. You wear the white robe, walk the sacred paths, and pretend not to notice how heavy ceremony feels for someone your age. Still, you carry it well. Everyone says so. That quiet boy with the solemn eyes, he'll go far. Rome, meanwhile, doesn't stop for you. It never does. The city groans with excess and ambition. Its streets are lined with triumph and rot in equal measure. One block hosts a poet sipping honeyed wine. The next, a slave is beaten for dropping a clay pot. That's Rome. Beauty and cruelty served on the same plate. At night, you lie awake on a marble bed, the linen cool against your skin. Outside, torches flicker. Inside, your mind hums. You think about justice, about death, about why people shout when they could whisper. And you wonder, is power a cure or just another illness? You read Epictetus by candlelight. You don't just read him, you devour his words. Don't worry about what you can't control, he says. Worry only about your response. It's a thought so simple it rattles your bones. That night, you sleep a little easier. People begin to talk. He's different, they say. Strange, even. You overhear it. You file it away. But instead of changing, you double down on stillness, on softness, on silence. Let them underestimate you. It will make the noise of your clarity all the louder when the time comes. One day, while walking through the Forum, you pause before a statue of Caesar Augustus. The stone is smooth, worn by 1,000 glances. You look up at that perfect Roman nose, those immortalized eyes, and you think, what if greatness isn't about being remembered, but about being right? A servant nearby offers you dates, but you wave them off. You're already full of questions, of philosophy, of things you don't yet have words for. Somewhere deep inside you, a voice is forming. One that will one day speak across centuries, under covers, into earbuds, in rooms like this. But for now, you are just a boy in white linen, watching, wondering, waiting. The candle sputters. The night leans in. You're still a boy, but the days no longer feel like yours. They belong to tutors, scrolls, and shadowed walks between libraries and lessons. The empire has begun shaping you, not with swords or shouts, but with the slow pressure of expectation. You rise before the sun. The marble floors are cold beneath your feet, and you savor that tiny discomfort. It wakes you faster than any servant could. You put on your plain tunic, not because it's the fashion, but because you've already started practicing something most men never attempt: simplicity. Outside, Rome begins to stir. You hear it before you see it. Carts creaking, slaves muttering, the distant clatter of the market as day breaks over tiled roofs and sandstone towers. But you're not headed to the Forum. You're going to sit with Rusticus again, your Stoic tutor, whose beard is long, voice low, and questions endless. Rusticus doesn't praise you, not ever. That's how you know he respects you. He challenges you, forces you to wrestle with questions like, what is within your control? And what does it mean to be good? You hate some of the answers. You hate that they often begin with your own weakness. But you return to his lessons day after day, the same way you return to your writing. Quietly, consistently, like tending a fire you can't afford to let die. Sometimes you walk the gardens after lessons. The olive trees sway gently in the breeze, their shadows dancing on the stone paths. You sit by the fountain and trace your finger through the water. You think about impermanence, about how everything flows, everything fades. It doesn't make you sad, it makes you calm. You're starting to realize something. Emotions are like storms. They roll in, loud and fierce, but they also roll out. If you anchor yourself, not to power, not to fame, but to reason, you won't capsize. That's what Rusticus says. That's what Epictetus whispered to you through parchment. At night, you don't dream of palaces or glory. You dream of stillness, of quiet rooms filled with light, of conversations that don't need to end in conquest. But Rome is never quiet for long. Hadrian, the aging emperor, has begun thinking about his successor. It won't be you, not yet. But you feel the shift. There are more eyes on you now, more subtle nods in the halls, more passing glances that linger too long. You're being measured. Then comes the moment. Hadrian names Antoninus Pius as his heir, and insists that Antoninus in turn adopt you. It's a strange arrangement. Political, of course. Strategic. But beneath it, there's something older, more primal. Rome choosing its future not through blood, but through philosophy. At 17, you are adopted into the imperial family, not by birth, but by design. The world doesn't feel heavier immediately. It feels surreal. One day you're arguing with Rusticus about temperance. The next, you're being fitted for robes woven with gold thread. You endure the ceremony in silence, but part of you winces at the pageantry. It feels like dressing up truth in lies. Antoninus is kind, wise even. But where you are quiet water, he is carved stone, stable, measured, respected. He becomes both your guardian and your shadow, and you learn from him in ways words could never teach, like how not to panic when the Senate snarls, or how to hold your ground without ever raising your voice. And yet you still return to your books. You still scratch reflections into the margins of scrolls. You still ask yourself, am I being ruled by my mind or by my impulses? Most young men dream of inheritance. You dream of self-control. There's a quiet irony in all of this. The world is beginning to call you prince, but in your own mind, you're still a student trying to master the art of breathing in chaos without letting it fill your lungs. One evening, as the sun melts into the Tiber River, you walk alone along the embankment. The city is loud behind you, full of torches and laughter and smoke. But out here, by the water, it's almost still. You think about Hadrian, about Antoninus, about the weight of names and the silence of death. You pick up a stone and toss it gently into the river. Ripples, that's what you hope to be. Not a wave, not a flood, just something small, but true. Something that moves through time with purpose, even if the world never remembers the hand that threw it. The marble halls are longer now, the ceilings higher. You walk them not as a boy anymore, but as a young man shaped by silence and surrounded by murmurs. Rome has begun to wrap itself around your name. Marcus Aurelius, heir of Antoninus, student of Stoics, whisper of a future emperor. Your days unfold in rhythm. Dawn lessons, midday rituals, evening debates. You learn law and language, philosophy and policy. You learn that even truth has a rhythm in Rome, and it rarely marches in a straight line. Antoninus, your adoptive father, rules with steadiness. He is calm in Senate chambers, generous in ceremonies, firm without cruelty. You admire him not because of his title, but because of his restraint. His refusal to be theatrical is, in a way, his greatest performance. You study him carefully. He does not rule with fear, and neither will you. Yet Rome is never content with one voice. And so, another name is whispered beside yours. Lucius Verus, your adoptive brother, Antoninus's other heir. Where you are austere, Lucius is lavish. Where you ponder, he plays. He sparkles at feasts, his laughter spilling like wine. You don't resent him, not exactly. But sometimes, as he stumbles out of another celebration, you wonder how two men raised by the same empire can walk such different paths. The empire sees you both as balance, two weights on the scale of power. You see yourselves as opposites orbiting a center that never quite holds. In the quiet hours of the morning you write, not speeches, not decrees, but thoughts, short lines, personal reflections. You don't write for applause. You write to survive, to remind yourself of the ground beneath your sandals. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. It's just a line, one of many. You don't know that someday those words will echo across centuries, whispered to soldiers, philosophers, tired students, and strangers trying to sleep. You also begin to notice something Rome doesn't like to admit. Power changes people before they even hold it. Men begin to smile more carefully around you. They nod more deeply. Some flatter, others fear. A few test, but you remain still. Stillness is your rebellion. One afternoon, as you walk through a columned courtyard, a senator approaches. He speaks of influence, legacy, the importance of public image. You smile faintly, then ask him, "How many emperors can you name from 2 centuries ago?" He pauses. You walk on. Legacy, you realize, is often just vanity in a toga. But you do not reject service. You accept it with eyes wide open. You take your place on the consul's chair for the first time at age 18. The crowd applauds. Trumpets sound. It is ceremonial, yes, symbolic. But still, a signal to the world that Marcus Aurelius has stepped into Rome's bloodstream. Later that night, you take off the crimson-trimmed robe and fold it carefully, as if it were made of parchment. You sit alone by the window, watching torches flicker below. You write, "Ambition means tying your well-being to what other people say or do. Sanity means tying it to your own actions." Outside, Lucius is likely drinking beneath chandeliers. You are drinking words. Antoninus, for all his dignity, begins to age. His pace slows, his eyes dim. You see it, not just in his posture, but in the way he watches the Senate with weariness instead of purpose. You sit with him more now, ask questions not just about law, but about disappointment, about regret. One day, he places a hand on your shoulder and says nothing. That silence teaches you more than any scroll. Still, Rome moves. It always does. It does not pause for grief or philosophy. There are wars abroad, deals at home, temples rising, roofs collapsing. The empire is both a marvel and a mess. And in the center of it, you, not by conquest, but by design, by legacy, by adoption. In the shadows of your chamber, lit by a single oil lamp, you stare at the bust of Hadrian on the shelf. His chiseled face seems amused. He set this all in motion, the chain of adoptions, the carefully built lineage of virtue. You wonder, did he see in you a ruler or merely a balance to Lucius? No matter. You don't believe in fate, not the kind people pray to anyway, but you do believe in reason, in choice, in showing up for the moment, again and again, until the moment bows to your presence. One evening, you are invited to speak before a group of young nobles. They expect a speech on discipline. You speak instead of humility. Do not waste what is left of your life in guessing what others think of you, you tell them. Some smile politely, one or two scoff, but a few go quiet, the good kind of quiet, the kind that happens when someone feels, for a moment, understood. You are not emperor yet, but you are becoming something rarer. A ruler in the making who does not crave the crown. The years drift forward, and though Rome thrives on spectacle, your life remains stitched together by small, intentional moments. You wake before the servants, sip water warmed just slightly by the morning air, and write, not for history, not for ceremony, but for clarity. Your teacher Rusticus is older now. His beard more salt than iron, his step slower, but his voice is still a blade wrapped in linen. He doesn't flatter you, not even when you sit beside the emperor, especially not then. Today he brings you a new scroll, not from Epictetus. This one is older, Clenthus, a Stoic poet. You read the lines slowly, the words heavy with stillness. Lead me, Zeus and destiny, wherever your decrees have placed me. You pause, then raise an eyebrow. Rusticus sees it. You're not a puppet, he says, but even a wise man must walk the road, not fight it. That night, you lie awake longer than usual, thinking not about emperorship, but about surrender. Meanwhile, Lucius flourishes in his own way, not with pens and reflection, but with perfume, theater, and company. He becomes a favorite among the people, his laughter ringing through colonnades and gardens. The contrast between you grows so obvious that it becomes a kind of joke. They call you the Marble Prince, and him the Golden Fool. You don't laugh, you don't frown either, you just observe. Because observation, as you've learned, is the philosopher's sword. Antoninus Pius continues to rule Rome with calm precision. His style is so measured, so uneventful, that historians centuries later will struggle to describe his reign. No conquests, no scandals, no madness. Just order. Boring by Rome's standards. Brilliant by yours. You watch how he speaks in Senate, never rushed, never rising to anger. He signs edicts without boasting. He attends religious festivals with just enough presence, never making them about himself. You study him as carefully as you once studied your father's handwriting. You don't copy him, but you absorb him. You are nearly 30 now, not young, not old, just seasoned, like iron left too long in rain, smoothed by time. One late evening, Antoninus calls you to his private chamber. His voice is quieter than usual. The Senate knows, the people know, the gods already decided, he says, handing you a scroll. Inside, the declaration, naming you and Lucius as joint emperors, not successors, not future rulers, but emperors now. The news sits on your lap like a warm shield. You breathe in, you breathe out. You say nothing at first, then quietly, "Are you at peace with this?" Antoninus smiles. "I am at peace with you." The following weeks are ceremonial storms. Crowds roar, priests chant. Laurel wreaths are pressed into your hair. You and Lucius stand side by side, both wearing purple, both wearing the burden. Rome now has two emperors, but everyone knows which one reads at dawn. You take the eastern provinces where Parthia threatens rebellion. Lucius volunteers to go. You let him. Whether from trust or strategy, no one's quite sure. But you remain in Rome, not to sit still, but to anchor. This is when the letters begin, not from others, from you. You start writing more often, more intentionally. These are not laws or speeches. They are fragments, thoughts, a kind of personal scripture, penned between edicts and festivals, while senators argue and generals march. You don't call them meditations yet. You just call them necessary. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Lucius, meanwhile, sends reports from the east, some useful, some soaked in wine. Still, he wins a few key victories, mostly due to his generals. Rome celebrates. You nod from afar. Then comes the plague. Brought back by returning soldiers, it creeps into the city like spilled ink, slow, unstoppable. They call it the Antonine Plague. You don't correct them, you just act. Temples fill with the sick. Markets grow quiet. Funeral pyres smolder on every horizon. You walk the streets in plain robes, not as a god, but as a man trying to hold the line. People notice. Some bow. Some weep. A few call you mad. Still, you walk. You visit hospitals, or what passes for them. You speak with doctors. You write in the evenings, hands shaking from exhaustion. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. These are not the writings of a man seeking immortality. They're the writings of someone trying to stay sane in a collapsing world. Lucius returns, weakened, thinner, changed. The plague didn't spare him. Within a year, he's gone. You now rule alone. No crown is heavier than the one no longer shared. You mourn quietly. No festivals are canceled, no public wailing. But in your private journals, the tone shifts. The reflections deepen. You begin to speak to yourself not as a prince or ruler, but as a fragile flame in a vast, cold wind. Rome marches on, as always. And you? You sit by a window in the same quiet chair where you first read Epictetus and whisper your thoughts into the parchment, wondering, as always, who they're really for. You're no longer preparing for the burden. You are the burden now. The empire is yours. Its law, its military, its sickness, its hunger, its temples, its politics, its whispers in the Senate halls, and its silent prayers in the slums. Every thread of Rome is now tangled through your fingers. And yet, you still rise before dawn. The light is dim. A single oil lamp flickers on your writing desk. Outside, the rooftops of Rome still sleep beneath a silver mist. You begin your day, as always, not with a command, but with a question, a meditation. When you arise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to think, to enjoy, to love. You write that before your sandals even touch the cold floor. There are voices outside, scribes, advisors, a senator already waiting in the atrium, agitated about grain prices. But for just a few moments, none of it matters. In these few lines, you are not an emperor. You are simply a man trying to be a better one than he was yesterday. The empire won't let you linger in stillness, of course. It rarely does. Letters arrive from the north. Tensions are rising near the Danube. Germanic tribes, Marcomanni, Quadi, are pushing against the imperial borders, raiding villages, defying treaties. They say it's a ripple effect from wars even farther east, or maybe the plague has weakened the frontier posts. Historians still argue whether it was poor diplomacy or economic desperation. Either way, the edge of Rome is fraying. You don't panic, you listen, and then you decide. You leave Rome. It surprises your advisors. Emperors don't ride out. Emperors wait behind walls of marble and give orders from thrones. But not you. You pack a tent, not a throne. You bring scrolls, not goblets. You bring your teenage son, Commodus, not because he's ready, but because he must begin to understand the gravity of empire. Your arrival near the Danube is not theatrical. There are no grand trumpets, just wind, trees, the smell of pine, and the soft crunch of frost beneath hooves. You set up camp among the soldiers. You eat what they eat. You sleep where they sleep. They notice. Your generals, even those bred on glory, can't help but respect you. You do not yell. You do not brag. You ask questions. You weigh answers. You reward restraint more than aggression. And when the time comes to strike, you strike cleanly, swiftly, and with precision. Each day is framed by hardship. Scouting reports, surprise raids, hunger in the ranks. But each evening, after the watchfires are lit and the camp sinks into a brittle quiet, you return to your scrolls. You take a deep breath. And you write. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. Not dramatic, not sorrowful, just honest. Some nights, the cold creeps into your joints. You lie wrapped in blankets that barely hold back the wind. You look up at the stars, those same stars you once stared at from your family's villa years ago, as a boy wondering what legacy even meant. You still don't have the answer, but you do have questions, and you know that asking them daily is more important than chasing applause. One night, a soldier brings you a story. A legionnaire deep in the Alps claimed to see an omen, fire in the sky, like a falling star that split into three. The men are whispering now, nervous. They fear divine disapproval. You don't dismiss them. You listen. Then you remind them gently that the gods prefer courage in quiet deeds over fear in loud prayers. You tell them the story of Socrates, how he faced death with calm, not because he denied it, but because he understood it was part of nature. You end with a joke, a small one, light as a wink. The soldiers laugh softly, not out of duty, but because for a moment they forgot they were terrified. That's leadership. You begin to notice Commodus watching you more carefully now, not asking questions yet, but watching. He still carries himself with the bravado of youth, swinging wooden swords too hard, speaking too loudly. But every once in a while, he goes quiet, and that silence gives you hope. Winter bites deeper. The snow thickens. The Danube freezes in parts, making it both a barrier and a trap. The Marcomanni don't stop. They adapt. They're not just raiders, they're survivors. And you begin to realize this isn't a war of conquest. It's a war of containment, one to keep the edge of the empire from bleeding inward. Each night you sit beneath a flickering torch, writing in the margins of your own thoughts. You don't write for glory. You write to remember yourself. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. The phrase echoes longer than you expect. Even when your generals begin winning, pushing back the tribes, reclaiming outposts, you refuse to gloat. You remind them, victory is temporary, virtue is not. Back in Rome, the Senate grows restless without your presence. Rumors float. Marcus is ill. Marcus is too soft. Marcus has lost the capital. But you let the rumors pass. You've begun to see them like clouds, big, loud, and always moving on. You're not just fighting an enemy in the forests. You're practicing how to rule when no one is watching. And as the winter fades, as the rivers thaw, and as your army regains its footing, you realize something strange. You feel more yourself out here, in the mud, in the cold, with scrolls beside spears, than you ever did in the marble halls of Rome. The philosopher-emperor has found his rhythm in the storm. Snow melts into soil, and with spring comes movement. Not just of rivers and roots, but of armies, intentions, and you. Your camp stirs earlier now, the air wet with thaw and the distant sound of hammers as soldiers repair what the frost stole. You rise before the camp crows, as always. The morning fog wraps your tent like a dream not yet finished. Outside, soldiers prepare quietly. They know your routine by now. No feasts, no speeches. Just a bowl of barley, a sip of water, and, if you're lucky, a full hour to write. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. You pause after writing that, reading it again, because it feels truer here than it ever could in Rome. Out here you've become more than emperor. You're present. You're a student of men, of weather, of silence. You've shared trenches, bread, and even the occasional crude joke with centurions. And in doing so, you've won a deeper kind of loyalty, not built on fear or formality, but on something simpler, trust. Still, the war continues. The Marcomanni and Quadi tribes press hard, bold now with spring beneath their heels. They are not mindless raiders. They fight with knowledge of the land and with the desperation of those who have nothing to lose. And that makes them dangerous. Your generals urge more decisive campaigns, but you resist rashness. You don't want to destroy. You want to stabilize. You meet with tribal envoys under canvas tents, sharing plain bread, speaking in broken Latin and careful glances. You ask questions. You listen. You write their mannerisms in your journal, not because it's politically useful, but because it reminds you they're human too. One afternoon, word comes from the frontier. A Roman fort has fallen. A cohort wiped out in a nighttime ambush. The losses are heavy. The camp is shaken. Commodus demands retaliation, swift and brutal. He rages in your presence, fists clenched, eyes wild. It's one of the few times you raise your voice. Conquer your anger before you speak, you say, quietly, but it lands like thunder. He storms out. The soldiers avert their eyes. You sit alone for a long time after, looking at your own reflection in a polished bronze plate. You don't see an emperor. You see a man trying to grow wisdom faster than his son can grow recklessness. It is not an even race. That night, you pen one of your shortest reflections yet. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. And you do try, in small ways. You order medical supplies be redirected to the wounded, even if it means the officers go without. You visit every injured soldier, not once, but repeatedly. You refuse the elaborate tent palaces offered by your staff, insisting on sleeping in the same drafty, reed-lined canvas as everyone else. Your back aches, your joints are stiff, but your resolve? Steel. Eventually a victory. Your forces retake the lost fort. The enemy scatters, not defeated entirely but slowed. Morale lifts, songs are sung in broken Latin, and for one night your camp feels like Rome. And yet you don't celebrate. You write, It is possible to be happy even in a palace. Then you add beneath it, but it is easier in a tent if your soul is at peace. Commodus watches you that night, really watches. You catch him mimicking how you tie your sandals. It's almost touching, until you remember that imitation without understanding can become arrogance. But still, he's trying, and so you let him stay by your side more often. Let him read your scrolls. Let him hear your strategy meetings. You hope something will stick, something deeper than tactics, something true. One day, while inspecting the wounded, a soldier asks you why you, the Emperor of Rome, choose to be here, among blood, rot, and screams, instead of far away in a marble palace. You reply, "Because I do not believe virtue can grow in warmth and gold alone. Sometimes it needs mud." He nods, says nothing. But you notice he holds his spear differently the next day, like it means something more. Later, walking back from the river, you come across a tree split by lightning, charred, hollow, but still standing. You stop and stare at it for a long time. Then you write, "The fire that burns within us must not consume us. Let it light, not destroy." The campaign continues, of course. Nothing in Rome ends quickly. Treaties are tested, borders redrawn. But for every sword drawn, you ask, is this necessary? That question becomes your compass, your conscience, your empire's true north. One evening, as you prepare for another march, you spot Commodus trying to lift a crate too heavy for him. You help him, silently, without scolding. He blushes. He's not used to weakness being met with gentleness. You don't say anything profound. You just hand him a smaller box. And in that moment, you wonder if perhaps he needs fewer lessons about power and more examples of grace. You close the day with another meditation. Your fingers ache as you write. Your candle flickers dangerously low. But you write anyway. You are a soul carrying a corpse. You exhale slowly. A small smile curls at the edge of your lips. Not because it's bleak, but because in its own strange way it's freeing. You blow out the candle, and in the dark you sleep like a soldier, tired, grounded, and ready to wake up as a philosopher again. The days stretch into years. You've grown used to the rhythm of war now, not its violence but its constancy. The cold mornings, the endless logistics, the soft scrape of leather boots against frozen ground, and the way campfires blur into constellations after too little sleep. You've learned that war is less about grand battles than about waiting for the right moment, for the roads to thaw, for messages to return, for men to change, though most don't. What surprises you is how peace becomes more elusive the longer you fight for it. Your legions now patrol the Danube like clockwork, and the threat from the tribes softens, but never disappears. They retreat into the forests only to re-emerge later. Guerrilla war, seasonal raids, diplomacy that turns to dust overnight. Historians will later debate whether you could have ended it all faster with brute force, whether restraint prolonged the suffering. But you're not interested in winning arguments centuries in the future. You're interested in not becoming what you fight. You begin building new settlements in the region, not forts, but communities, outposts with libraries and temples, not just armories and prisons. You send engineers, not just soldiers, teachers, not just tax collectors. And in your letters to the Senate, you include philosophy. You argue not just for strategy, but for mercy. Some scoff, some yawn. One senator writes privately, "Marcus dreams like a child." You smile at that, because what they don't realize is this: dreams are the only things strong enough to outlive empires. You write in your journal that night, "What does not benefit the hive cannot benefit the bee." Commodus now walks beside you daily. He's taller, stronger, a man in body, though not yet in mind. He's restless. His confidence is loud. He speaks of destiny, of domination, of expanding Rome further east. You listen, but you push back. You show him maps, but not of territory, of logistics, of water routes, of grain supply chains. You explain how the wrong winter can starve a whole legion. He fidgets. He'd rather hear about glory. You sigh, softly, not in defeat, but in patience. Because you remember being young, you remember feeling like fire. Still, there are moments when he surprises you. A quiet glance, a rare apology. One evening, after watching you comfort a dying soldier, he asks, "Does it ever get easier?" You look at him and say, "No, but it becomes more necessary." The plague still lingers, not as fierce as before, but persistent. Rome coughs in the shadows. Soldiers fall ill between battles. You establish mobile clinics, order incense burned not just for ceremony, but sanitation. It's crude, but it helps. At night you cough too. Sometimes it's nothing, other times it rattles too deep, but you don't complain. You just write, "Soon you will be ashes or bones, a name or not even a name." And that makes you smile oddly, not out of morbidity, but freedom. Because it reminds you to act without pretense, to serve without expecting statues. Rome sends more messengers. Back home, trouble stirs in the Senate. There are whispers of corruption, of governors overreaching, of men invoking your name to justify cruelty. One city claims to have built a statue of you taller than the local temple. You send them a polite letter requesting its removal. "If I wanted to be worshipped," you write, "I would have conquered the stars." It's partially a joke, but also not. Meanwhile, the soldiers under your command grow deeply loyal, not because of propaganda, but because you never placed yourself above them. You bleed, you age, you endure, and they see it. One old centurion, wounded beyond repair, asks to die in your tent, not because he fears death, but because he wants to go with honor. You sit with him, hold his hand, and as he slips away, you quote Epictetus softly, "It's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." He doesn't respond, but his breathing eases. You write about it that night. You don't include his name, but you remember it. Back in Rome, statues of you are being erected anyway. Coins minted, your face staring back at citizens across the provinces. You hate it, but you understand it. Rome needs symbols. You just don't want to become one. Because symbols don't breathe, they don't change. They can't doubt themselves or laugh at their own contradictions. But you do. Be tolerant with others, strict with yourself. You scribble that down in a rush before Commodus barges in with a question about military honors. Later, sitting beneath the stars again, you notice how quiet the forest feels now. Less threat, less tension. Maybe it's the season, maybe it's the work you've done, or maybe it's just the eye of another storm. Still, in that silence you feel something settle. Not peace, not victory, but alignment. Like your outer role and your inner thoughts are finally walking in step. You close your eyes and whisper, "Good enough. Tomorrow the road will begin again." But for tonight, you are warm, alive, clear. You wake with a stiffness that doesn't fade, a cough that bites deeper. The cold clings longer to your bones. You're not old exactly, but your body is beginning to whisper what your mind already knows. Even emperors unravel. Still you rise. You've never believed in retreat. Not from duty, not from discomfort, and certainly not from pain. So you drink warm water slowly, clear your throat, and reach again for the wax tablet by your bedside. Do every act of your life as though it were your last. It's not a warning. It's a suggestion, a reminder to stay intentional. The days blur so easily otherwise, especially out here in the frontier mist, where the line between campaign and routine has grown thin. Commodus doesn't see it yet. He stretches like a lion, full of health and hunger. He talks about monuments, about how history will remember this war and remember him. You nod, but inside your thoughts drift elsewhere. Because it's not the memory of a man that shapes the world, it's his discipline while still breathing. Today, you receive a letter from Rome. The Senate is anxious. Factions are shifting. 2 governors have begun acting more like kings, and a third has declared a new festival in your honor, complete with golden statues and prayers offered at sunrise. You sigh. You never asked to be worshipped. You asked to be useful. You write back, kindly but directly. The gods are not flattered by marble. They are honored when men act justly. Still, the signs are clear. The longer you're away, the more the machine of empire begins to twist under its own weight. You start thinking about succession more urgently. Commodus is now a man, technically, but is he the man Rome needs? You test him gently. You ask his opinion on law, on justice, on mercy. He offers answers. Some are good, many are too confident. You correct him when you can. But part of you wonders, is correction enough? Historians will argue forever about this moment, whether you knew he would fail, whether you had any other choice, whether your commitment to stability blinded you to his flaws. But in this moment, you're not writing for historians. You're writing for yourself. Do not waste what remains of your life on what others think of you. So you decide once again to lead through presence, through example. That means returning to Rome, not in splendor, but in humility. Not with a triumph, but with a transition. Still, the war must end first. You begin negotiations with the tribal leaders. It's delicate. These are people who've lost homes, sons, traditions. You don't lecture, you listen. And when you speak, you don't promise dominance. You offer coexistence. They're skeptical at first. Why wouldn't they be? Rome has broken promises before, but slowly, patiently, your words land. You speak of order, of fair borders, of trade, of peace that doesn't humiliate. And one by one, they begin to nod. You end the war without glory. And that's the glory. Your men return to camp with a strange quiet, not the roaring pride of conquest, but a deep, warm stillness, the kind that comes after long tension finally releases. Commodus asks why there's no celebration. You tell him, peace doesn't need a parade, it needs caretakers. That night, you walk alone to the riverbank. The moon is low, the stars sharp. The Danube flows softly, no longer a boundary, but a mirror. You see your reflection and notice the changes. Sunken cheeks, thinning beard, lines etched like roads into your forehead. You kneel by the water and splash your face. It stings, it clears. You whisper a line to yourself, not from the Stoics, but from your own bones. Let me be forgotten so long as Rome remembers balance. You know your time is winding down, not dramatically, just quietly, like the slow fading of a campfire after dawn. And so your writing becomes more urgent. You no longer edit. You no longer wonder who will read it. You simply write. Death smiles at us all. All we can do is smile back. You don't mean it as bravado. You mean it as truth. And truth you've learned doesn't shout. It whispers, then waits. Rome calls again. You begin preparations to return. The soldiers are sorrowful, but they understand. They've followed you not because you ruled, but because you shared, because you lived the words you spoke. Before you leave, you gather them. No grand speech, just a single line. Serve Rome, but serve your soul more. You embrace your officers. You clasp forearms with centurions. You hug one young scout who reminds you of yourself at 13, chasing shadows through the olive groves. Then you climb into the carriage, not ornate, not gold-trimmed, just wood, wool, and wheels turning toward home. Commodus rides beside you, silent, watching. And for a brief moment, as the forest gives way to fields, you feel it. Closure, not because the journey is over, but because you've walked it fully. The road to Rome winds through landscapes that seem quieter now. Fields that once held legions now sway with wheat. and hills once echoed with shouts now host only the chirr of crickets. The empire is still vast, still breathing, but as you cross each mile, it feels more fragile, not broken, just tired, much like you. The journey home is slow, as if time itself knows you're not in a hurry. You watch peasants harvesting figs. You smell the iron-rich scent of the soil. You nod to farmers who stop their plows to bow. You wish they wouldn't, but you don't scold them either. Somewhere near Ariminum, your fever returns. It's not dramatic at first. Just heat in the joints, a cough deeper than it should be. But you know, your body is sending its final dispatches. You keep going. At night, you still write. Less now, but no less carefully. Your script is shaky. The wax tablet sometimes smudges beneath your thumb. But your thoughts are clear, maybe clearer than ever. Accept death in a cheerful spirit as nothing but the dissolution of the elements. You read it back to yourself, then chuckle. Cheerful may be asking too much. Commodus, riding beside you, begins to fidget more. He sees your condition worsening. You can tell it unnerves him, not because he's afraid to lose you, but because he's afraid to be seen as the one left behind. That's the danger of legacy. It can become a mirror you stare into so long you forget to see the world. Still, you try to reach him. You talk to him by firelight, no lectures, just stories. Of your teachers, of your mistakes, of your doubts, especially your doubts. Strength, you tell him, is not how loudly you speak. It's how calmly you stay upright when others fall to chaos. He nods, but you're not sure he hears you. Not really. By the time you reach Vindobona, a modest Roman outpost in the province of Pannonia, you are too weak to continue. The physicians try. They murmur and mix, whisper and wipe sweat from your brow. But you already know the truth. You have days, maybe less. You request a quieter room. No marble, no ceremony. Just a cot, some water, a small table for writing. Your breathing shortens. The pain stabs deeper now, but you don't cry out. You've trained too long for that. And still you write. Soon you will have forgotten everything. Soon everyone will have forgotten you. It doesn't depress you. It relieves you. Because if all fades, then what matters is how you lived, not how long. Your officers come to pay respects. Some kneel, some cry. You smile at them all and tell them gently, "Stand. I am not a god. I am a man who did his best." Commodus stands by the doorway, unsure whether to step closer. You motion him forward. And you finally say what you've avoided for so long. "Be better than me." He frowns, confused. "But you were the greatest emperor." You shake your head slowly. "No, I was the most aware of being one." You give him your journals. Not all of them, just one volume. Your most recent, the one filled with those final, spare, direct lines. You press it into his hands. You tell him not to read it now. Wait, read it when the silence gets too loud. He nods, but his eyes dart. His fingers twitch. He still sees the throne as a prize, not a burden. Still you try again. "Power," you whisper, "is only holy if it humbles you." Whether that lands, you don't know. You're slipping now. The room fades in and out. Your body is no longer a loyal companion. It feels distant, foreign, like a suit of armor rusting at the joints. And yet, one last time you reach for your tablet. You write one final line. "Nature gives and nature takes. Be grateful." Then you lean back, close your eyes, and for the first time in decades, you rest without duty tugging at your sleeve. The empire is quiet. The sky outside Vindobona is soft and gray. Somewhere the Danube flows with indifference. Your soul, if such a thing exists, does not rise with fireworks. It simply lets go. And history inhales. Rome at that moment shifts ever so slightly. Marcus Aurelius is gone, and the world is left holding your thoughts, scribbled in dark ink, wrapped in wax, kissed by cold fingers. Fragments of a mind that loved reason more than glory. that feared no death but the death of virtue. Commodus weeps, but whether for you or for himself you'll never know. You are gone now, but the world does not pause. The sun rises over Vindobona just the same. Soldiers drill in the courtyards, bakers knead dough, horses stamp impatiently in the mud. Rome, eternal, indifferent, ever turning, does what it has always done. It continues. Commodus steps forward. At first he tries, he really does. He reads from your journals, aloud to advisors who half listen. He sits on the tribunal with a posture that mimics yours. He repeats your phrases, clipped and clear, about justice, about self-control, about balance. But it doesn't last, because imitation is not understanding, and discipline is not instinctive, not for him. He prefers silk to simplicity, applause to contemplation. Where you sought clarity, he seeks spectacle. The quiet mornings you loved are replaced with chariots and banquets, with gladiator fights and perfumes thick as fog. The meditations gather dust. The Senate watches, some with resignation, some with malice, a few with hope that it's just a phase. But deep down, they all feel it. The center is slipping. Historians will call it the beginning of decline. They're not entirely wrong. Commodus rules with a strange blend of insecurity and ego. He declares himself Hercules reborn. He poses with clubs and lion pelts. He fights in the arena, not as punishment or ceremony, but for pleasure, demanding victory after every staged duel. You would have hated it, not the theatrics. Rome has always loved a show. But the hollowness, the absence of thought, of purpose. And yet, in the midst of it all, something remarkable happens. Your words survive, not through edicts or monuments or temple, but in the margins of libraries, in soldiers' journals, in whispered quotes passed from one tutor to another. Your meditations, never intended for public reading, begin to drift like pollen, transcribed, translated, treasured by those who need guidance in a world growing louder and less patient. You didn't write them for glory, but they become a kind of scripture, not of gods, but of how to be human. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. In dusty marketplaces, a young merchant copies that line onto a scrap of leather and tucks it into his tunic for courage. In the shadow of the Senate, a tired advisor quotes your maxim, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy," when asked to betray a friend. And far in the future, in places you never dreamed of, your voice continues. In dorm rooms, in hospitals, in war zones, in prison cells. In moments when someone, somewhere, needs to remember that even amidst chaos, calm is possible. Back in Rome, your statues gather grime. One is melted down to fund a naval festival. Another is rededicated to a lesser god. No one panics. It's the way of things. But your words, they linger. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Commodus continues to unravel. Paranoia sets in. Friends vanish. Enemies multiply. He begins to fear his own shadow, though not enough to step out of the spotlight. Eventually, the Senate turns. The whispers become daggers. One night, his own wrestling partner strangles him in his bath. He dies not as Hercules, not as Caesar, but as a cautionary tale. And again, Rome continues, your dynasty ends with him. But your legacy? It begins with you. Centuries pass. Empires rise and fall. Religions shift. Languages die. Borders vanish. But your quiet musings, written on campaign between battles by firelight, endure. Why? Because they never promised perfection, only presence. Only this. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Not bad advice, whether you're an emperor or just someone trying to survive another Tuesday. People will call you the philosopher king, the last good emperor, a Stoic saint. But if you could hear them, you might smirk, shake your head and say, No, I was simply trying not to be a fool. And that is what made you great. Centuries sweep past like dry leaves caught in wind. The marble fades. The temples crumble. Even the language you wrote in slowly mutates, drifting from Latin to silence. Yet your voice remains, not booming from statues, but whispering between book covers, in minds bent over desks, in hearts cracked open by doubt. You never intended your journal to be read. You didn't title it. You didn't polish it. You wrote in the stolen hours between duty and exhaustion, between raids and plague, between the weight of the empire and the weight of your own conscience. And yet somehow that honesty gave it wings. In the Byzantine Empire, long after your bloodline is forgotten, monks copy your passages in candlelit scriptoria. They frown at some lines, debate others, but preserve them anyway. Maybe because they sense something sacred hidden in their simplicity. Later, Renaissance humanists rediscover you. To them, you are not just a Roman emperor, you are proof that reason can survive power, that philosophy doesn't need a robe and sandals, that even those crowned with iron can ask soft questions in the dark. In the Age of Enlightenment, your thoughts become a compass, not absolute, but reliable. Thinkers quote you alongside Descartes and Hume. They admire your balance, skeptical but not cynical, gentle but never passive. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. That line, scrawled by candlelight in a freezing military camp, ends up etched into courthouse walls and memorial stones centuries later. Not because it's beautiful, but because it helps people breathe. Your ideas survive revolutions. They survive industrial smoke, mechanized war, collapsing monarchies, global shifts. They find readers in both palaces and prisons. They guide Stoics and skeptics alike. They become the backbone of thousands of quiet revolutions, not of governments, but of individuals. People who choose patience over rage, perspective over panic, curiosity over control. In World War I, a young British soldier carries a battered copy of your meditations in his coat. He marks the pages with blood and mud. He doesn't live to see the end of the war, but his diary notes one line from you, scribbled over and over. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. In the 1960s, astronauts quote you before stepping into the void. In modern boardrooms, entrepreneurs whisper your name like a spell, not for luck, but for clarity. And in bedrooms, in hospitals, in courtrooms, people still read you. They don't always agree. Sometimes they're disappointed you didn't do more, say more, rebel harder. Some want you to be a warrior, others a saint. But what they find again and again is someone very rare, a man in power who tried, every single day, to stay awake. You wrote no grand treatise, no gospel, no theory of everything, just fragments, notes, repetitions, a voice whispering over and over, be decent, be deliberate, be disciplined, remember death, respect life, don't lie, don't overreact, don't waste this. That was your theology, your strategy, your rebellion. Even now, some scholars try to pick you apart. Was your stoicism a mask? Was your compassion calculated? Were you too lenient with Commodus? Maybe. But the words remain, and not just your words, your example. That an emperor, the most powerful man in the known world, once sat quietly beside a flickering lamp, wrestling with his impulses, trying to be better. Not trying to be remembered, just trying to be worthy of the role he was given. And in doing so, he became unforgettable. So when people ask, who was Marcus Aurelius? They don't point to a statue. They hand over a slim, worn book, a copy of your meditations, the book you never meant to publish, the one that outlived everything else. And that's the best kind of immortality. Time, as always, keeps moving. But your words somehow don't age. The world becomes unrecognizable. Steel towers claw the sky, machines speak in code, people light their faces with glowing rectangles and race through lives that barely pause to breathe. Empires fall out of fashion. Gods are debated on podcasts. Wars are fought through screens. And still, you are Reed. You, who never imagined electricity, let alone the internet, find new readers in teenagers on buses, soldiers on watch, and insomniacs in city apartments lit by blinking routers. Your meditations, stripped of time, slip into the minds of people who feel lost in noise. Because what you still offer, isn't a system. It's a still point. It's one man quietly insisting that even in chaos you can remain whole. You have survived 100 troubles. Why should this one defeat you? One line, 9 words. Yet when read in a moment of panic, it can feel like oxygen. A small hand reaching out across centuries saying, "You've got this." There's something almost comical in it, isn't there? That you, an emperor from a crumbling empire, end up as a kind of therapist for modernity. A calm whisper in a culture that can't stop shouting. Your wisdom wasn't flashy. No miracles, no martyrdom, just practice, just repetition. When someone today says they're trying to be stoic, what they often mean is, I want to respond with purpose, not panic. And that desire, that comes from you. In classrooms, students debate whether you were too passive. Could you have stopped Commodus? Should you have dismantled more corruption? The questions are fair, important even. But the most honest answer remains the same. You were a man doing his best, with eyes wide open. And unlike most in power, you doubted yourself. You interrogated your motives. You asked questions instead of delivering proclamations. You made mistakes and didn't run from them. That's what sticks. Not your titles, not your victories, but your willingness to be seen without armor. Because there's courage in facing battle, but there's greater courage in facing yourself. If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change. For I seek the truth by which no one was ever truly harmed. Even now, that line stings the ego. Most people would rather defend a mistake than revise their worldview. But you made course correction part of your daily routine. You were emperor, but you lived like a student. That posture, that hunger for refinement, makes your work feel less like instruction and more like permission. Permission to not be perfect, to be messy, uncertain, full of contradiction, and still worthy of self-respect. You didn't pretend to have all the answers. You just showed up every morning, ready to try again. And people remember that, not because you conquered lands, but because you conquered your reactions. In a world more anxious than ever, where the future feels like a fog bank wrapped around a firestorm, your words serve as flares, glimpses of clarity, soft warnings that whisper, don't chase what you can't control. Don't trade your peace for someone else's opinion. Don't forget, you're mortal and that's okay. You're not worshipped. You wouldn't want to be. But you are trusted. And in a world full of noise, trust is louder than applause. So strange as it sounds, Marcus Aurelius, you are still here. Not in your bones, not in your statues, but in every quiet decision someone makes to pause, breathe, and choose reason over rage. The modern world, with all its speed and spectacle, still finds time for you. Not just in philosophy classes or quiet monasteries, but in gyms, on podcasts, tattooed on forearms, scribbled in bullet journals, quoted by CEOs and spoken by school teachers when the classroom chaos threatens to erupt. You're a strange companion for all of them. A Roman emperor in dusty sandals speaking directly to their anxious, overclocked minds. And they love you not because you offer comfort, but because you offer clarity. The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. In an era obsessed with control, over time, money, health, status, that line is radical, because it shifts the entire battleground inward. You remind people that it's not the world that needs adjusting, it's how we think about it. And that's why your philosophy endures. Because unlike so many doctrines that point fingers or demand compliance, you simply ask, What can you do right now with the mind you have and the life you're given? The answer, more than you think, but less than your ego wants. This balance between action and restraint makes you more relevant now than ever. In a culture that worships performance, you preach humility. In a society drowning in stimulation, you advocate stillness. In an age where opinions are currency, you teach discipline over reaction. People post your quotes online daily, often without knowing the full depth behind them. But that doesn't matter. A single sentence can change the rhythm of someone's day, can turn a breakdown into a breath. How ridiculous and how strange to be surprised at anything which happens in life. That line? It shows up in grief groups, in recovery meetings, on therapy worksheets, not because it removes the pain, but because it names it, softens its edges and says, "You're not the first, and you won't be the last. You are not a prophet. You made no promises of paradise. You didn't predict salvation, only struggle, and the possibility of strength within it." That honesty is what makes you timeless. You don't talk about how to escape reality. You talk about how to engage it. As it is, messy, brutal, beautiful, fleeting. Even the way you speak of death, never with dread, always with frankness, feels like a gift. Don't act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. Not pious, not perfect, just good. That word, small as it is, holds your entire worldview. Good, not as in naive or weak, but good as in grounded, steady, directed. A goodness built from intention, not image. And so you've become a companion to the world's thinkers and strugglers. You stand beside them at the foot of the bed when they can't sleep. You ride with them on the subway through rain-slick cities. You appear in their minds when they're about to say something cruel and help them choose silence. You are not loud, you are not flashy, but you are there because you understood something most rulers never did, that the hardest empire to govern is your own mind. And you did not conquer it once and claim victory. You showed up every day to try again. Sometimes you failed, sometimes you faltered, but you always returned to the page, to the task, to the truth. That's why you endure, because you were not a god pretending to be human. You were a human refusing to pretend he was anything more. And in that refusal, you became something greater than legend. You became real. You didn't seek immortality. In fact, you wrote often of its foolishness, how fame is just wind through leaves, how names fade faster than anyone expects. You saw statues topple in your own lifetime, empires collapse in less than a generation. You knew the future wouldn't remember you for long, and yet here we are. You weren't canonized. No cult rose in your name. You didn't demand loyalty or ask to be deified like so many emperors before you. And because you didn't ask, people gave it freely. Not worship, but trust. Because at your core, you were never pretending. You wrote honestly of your exhaustion, your envy, your constant struggle to stay present. You admitted to being irritated by fools. You admitted how hard it was to live the way you knew you should. You didn't teach from a mountaintop, you taught from the mud. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. That line, pulled from the quiet moments of your morning routine, still starts people's days 2,000 years later. Not as a mantra, but as a reminder that before ambition, before schedules, before fear, there is life. And that is enough. Your writing is full of reminders, not commands, not sermons, just nudges. Nudge, you don't control what happens. Nudge, you do control how you respond. Nudge, life is short. Stop pretending it's not. Nudge, let go, forgive, move forward. People don't quote you because you were perfect. They quote you because you were trying to stay calm in chaos, trying to be kind when angry, trying to stay principled while holding enormous power. And that trying, the showing up day after day, is what resonates across centuries. You wrote for yourself, but in doing so, you wrote for everyone. Today, readers still sit with your words when their relationships fall apart, when illness strikes, when careers crumble, when the path forward disappears beneath fog and doubt. They open meditations not looking for answers, but for steadiness. Because even now, when everything else feels untethered, your sentences land like anchors. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. You probably never imagined that line would be on coffee mugs, billboards, and training manuals. But the reason it spread isn't marketing. It's because it gives people strength. It reframes pain. It turns struggle into direction, not escape, but motion. And you always believed in motion. Even when exhausted, even when dying, you chose action over avoidance. Thoughtful, honest action. You knew emotion would flare, ego would rise, but discipline would outlast them. In that way, you gave people a manual not for perfection, but for progress. A roadmap back to their better selves. Your ideas have now shaped leaders, generals, therapists, athletes, monks, artists, and even ordinary people just trying to get through Tuesday afternoon without screaming into their steering wheel. And that may be your greatest legacy. Not that you led Rome, but that you showed how to lead yourself. That you, Marcus Aurelius, stood in the dust and noise of empire and said, "This is hard. I'm tired, but I can still choose to do good." That is the flame that still burns. Not a wildfire, not a spotlight, just a single steady candle. And every day, someone, somewhere, lights theirs from yours. You never knew the future. You never imagined a world of airplanes, skyscrapers, artificial intelligence, or satellites circling the globe. You didn't predict the rise and fall of nations built on oil and data. You certainly never envisioned a time when a teenager on a different continent could read your thoughts in a digital cloud. But you didn't have to, because the human condition, that never changed. People still struggle with the same things you did. Anger, jealousy, fear of loss, hunger for control, the ache for meaning. The clothes are different, the tools are different, but the mind, the soul, just as unruly. And that's why your words still land. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. In a world of performance, of endless commentary, of everyone playing philosopher in 280 characters or less, that line slices through the fog. It reminds us that doing matters more than debating, and that's always been your gift. You weren't offering lofty theories. You weren't building cathedrals of thought. You were writing simply for the person staring into the dark, trying to do the right thing, even when no one would see. That's why people return to you, not because you offer hope in the sugary, empty way, but because you offer responsibility. You say, yes, the world is cruel. Yes, people will betray you. Yes, you will fail. Now, what will you do with that? And over, your answer was, try again. Even when sick, even when grieving, even when tempted to abandon all virtue and just indulge. Try again. The world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs people who keep trying to be decent. That's what you gave us, a model of struggling with dignity. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. That's wisdom forged in fire. Not cleverness, not idealism, just hard-earned clarity. And when people quote that line today, it's not to sound wise. It's to survive moments when rage could win, when bitterness tempts the soul, when cruelty feels easier. You kept us honest. You kept us awake. You reminded us that every day we get up, every time we choose patience, kindness, effort, we are making progress, not toward sainthood, but toward being someone we can live with. And in your final years, as you sat in Vindobona, bones aching, cough worsening, knowing that the end was near, you didn't build a monument. You wrote a journal. You didn't seek worship. You sought alignment. And in doing so, you did what few in power ever do. You left the world wiser than you found it. Your reign is long over. Your empire is dust. Your coins are artifacts behind glass. But your voice? Still clear, still calm, still whispering gently across the centuries. Control what you can. Let go of what you can't. And above all, act with purpose. You didn't need to be eternal. You just needed to be true. And you were. So now, as the final echoes of your story settle, let's ease into quiet. You've walked beside an emperor tonight, not one of marble or myth, but a man who ached like you, who wrestled his thoughts, who tried to stay upright in a world that pulled in every direction. His voice was soft but steady, his flaws visible, his effort relentless. Let that comfort you, because you don't have to be perfect either. Just willing to pause when anger stirs, willing to begin again after failure, willing to ask, is this necessary? Is this kind? Is this mine to carry? You can close your eyes now. Let the night hold you. Let the soft hum of your breath carry you farther from thought, deeper into stillness. You've listened. You've wandered through time. You've remembered what matters. Not gold, not fame, but presence, purpose, peace. You can release the need to be everything, to fix everything, to know everything. You are enough in this moment, exactly as you are, simply because you care to be better. That's rare and precious. So breathe in once more. Feel the weight leave your shoulders. The story is finished. The world can wait. And Marcus, he'd be proud of you. Good night.